partially influenced by economist Pierre Straffa, who discussed the quasi-monopolistic conditions found in markets that are subdivided into regions. Hotelling's law introduced the concept of locational equilibrium in a duopoly. Space Hotelling established posed not merely a barrier in the form of transportation for goods, but it was also a field on which sellers scrambled to be nearest to the customer. And Hotelling observed that where prices are fixed, customers prefer the nearest option. And if customer preferences are uniformly distributed, then sellers should really make their products as similar as possible. Now let's consider the actual mechanics of the model. So there are generally two opposing forces. On the one hand, there is an incentive of the seller to inch closer toward the center in order to maximize the customer distribution. On the other hand, there is the more rational incentive for both sellers to locate and remain on opposite extremes in what is considered to be the strategic move. Generally, we can see this movement play out over a 7-stage process. So beginning at the socially optimal solution, one of the incumbents is tempted and, of course, inches a little closer toward the center. Well, guess what? Your competitor retaliates, they inch a little closer too. And then you in turn inch a little closer and you end up in the Nash equilibrium. Doesn't work out for anyone. Then you move back toward the original positions and then ultimately back again to the socially optimal solution. Now, as with any model, Hotelling's is imperfect, and the issues with his model really stem more or less from the assumptions implicit to it. So looking at that first pricing assumption, it's highly unlikely that a pricing scenario such as this would ever occur in the real world. For a firm to set a price before making such an important and strategic decision as defining its location and then not to revisit price afterward, highly unlikely. Now let's consider the geography issue. Granted, on a beach, it may be fair to assume that this side of the center is more or less the same as this side of the center. But off the beach, that is seldom the case. And even in a space with a homogeneous layout, customer distribution may differ. Now, even if those core assumptions around minimal product differentiation and price similarities are kept, we know that there are other ways to differentiate a buying experience, such as through spatial differentiation. Now that we've taken a deeper dive into Hotelling's model, let's assess some of the contradictory and supplementary theories and laws that have come about since 1929. So first, in stark contrast to Hotelling's principle of minimal product differentiation, Edward Chamberlain's theory of monopolistic competition explored how differentiation, which is enabled by the firm's unique resource endowments, can actually allow the firm to appeal more acutely to a specific target market and thus reduce and even eliminate competition. And decades later, we know that this business strategy is so widely considered to be a great source of competitive advantage. 5 decades later, we were introduced to Sallop's circular city model. That's a mouthful. It's a very popular variation of Hotelling's law. It also assesses consumer preferences with respect to geographic location, but it includes 2 major additions. The first being that the firms are located around a circle rather than a line with endpoints. And the second, that consumers have the additional option to purchase differentiated goods in addition to non-differentiated goods. Ultimately, the model brings about similar conclusions to Hotelling's model, with the 2 opposing effects of wanting to be nearest to the customer, but ultimately you end up closest to your competitor, which erodes both of your market share and hurts you both in the end, or being furthest away as possible. Now, finally, we have the Shaken-Sutton model. So this model was derived from a series of works put out by two economists. And the model focuses on vertical differentiation, which essentially means judging products based on their differences in qualities. And ultimately, the model says that given the same price, customers will always choose the higher quality product. Now that we've explored the model and we understand the context around other theories, I'm going to pass it off to Harain to discuss real-world implications and examples of this model.